The LDS Church just bought another apartment complex in Florida, a 456-unit apartment complex in Boca Raton for $240 million.
And when I heard that, it reminded me of what's happening in New Zealand. The Mormon Church in New Zealand has hundreds of millions in assets, most of it in property.
And meanwhile, poor and working class members are paying tithing, running the church for free, and watching a multi-billion-dollar institution buy luxury housing.
Hello, Eternal Family. Welcome to Post-Mormon Postmortem's Mormon Monday, where we talk about something of recent interest in Mormondom. I am Hannah.
And I'm Jess. This week, we're talking about the LDS Church buying more rental real estate in Florida and why that story reminded us of 2022 reporting out of New Zealand. The Florida story is straightforward. Property Reserve, the real estate arm of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, paid $240 million for Uptown Boca Villas, a 456-unit apartment complex in Boca Raton. Multi-Housing News reported that the property has 7 five-story buildings and came online in 2021.
So this isn't a chapel or a temple. It isn't a welfare farm. It's a rental apartment complex.
Yep. The Real Deal called it one of the priciest multifamily deals in South Florida so far this year. The seller, Cortland, had bought the property in 2021 for $230 million.
So that's the real estate story. The church's investment arm is buying expensive rental property in a high-value Florida market.
Right. And that's where the New Zealand reporting comes in.
Yeah, the article in the Salt Lake Tribune about the Florida buy reminded me of BusinessDesk's 2022 series on the LDS Church in New Zealand because that reporting shows the other side of institutional wealth. It looks at tithing, unpaid labor, property holdings, and how little ordinary members can see about where the money goes.
Yep. So BusinessDesk reported that the New Zealand LDS Church had $424 million in assets, making it the country's third wealthiest centralized religious group and the 20th richest charity. It also reported $113 million in annual revenue in 2020.
That's a lot of money for a church many New Zealanders might think of as relatively fringe. It's a lot of money for anybody.
BusinessDesk also reported that between 2008 and 2020, the Mormon Church in New Zealand took in more than $1 billion from both members and grants from Salt Lake City. In 2020 alone, it took in $45 million from members. So over the previous decade, members had contributed $392 million.
And tithing, as you know, isn't presented to members as casual generosity or optional. It is absolutely tied to worthiness and your salvation.
It is. The companion BusinessDesk article, which was titled A Labor of Loyalty, reported that members pay 10% tithe on gross income and that the average Mormon volunteer contributes 37 hours a week to the church. And this is based on the organization's charities register filings.
37 hours a week is basically a full-time job, unpaid.
And that's on top of actual paid work and family responsibilities and ordinary life.
Yeah, and if you've been a member, you know the system immediately. Okay, callings are teaching lessons and youth work and leadership meetings and ministering and organizing and carrying out activities, cleaning the building, food assignment, rides, temple trips, and an invisible admin that keeps the ward running. There's your 37 hours a week of unpaid labor.
BusinessDesk quoted a former bishop, and they just identified him as AB, saying that the church couldn't run without unpaid callings. He said he regularly gave 20 to 40 unpaid hours a week while also working full-time.
None of that is usually described as labor. It is described as service.
Which makes it harder to question.
Exactly. Service sounds holy. But when a wealthy institution depends on unpaid labor, collects tithing, and buys property, service, it's not such a simple word anymore.
No. BusinessDesk also reported that 96% of New Zealand's church assets were held in property, and that the church owned 248 properties in the country. That connects directly to the Florida purchase. This isn't a one off. Property is central to how the church stores and grows wealth.
In New Zealand, the church's national assets have more than doubled from 180 million in 2010 to more than 420 million as of this reporting in 2022, and the charitable spending picture is much smaller than the asset picture.
hmm Business Desk reported that New Zealand church records showed 6.2 million spent in 2020 on, quote, grants, donations, humanitarian and local unit expenses, end quote, which comes into about 6% of the organization's income. A former bishop told Business Desk he didn't see the obvious external charitable spending and said most of the charitable work came through members contributing time to service projects.
Yeah, that's useful to remember. Members give money, members give time. The institution holds property.
The Business Desk article also reported that tithing pressure falls on members in financially strained communities. Business Desk said 53.6% of New Zealand Latter day Saints came from the 20% most deprived neighborhoods in the country, including a quarter of followers living in South Auckland.
And that changes how the numbers land. Because a $240 million apartment purchase in Florida sounds different when you place it beside members in deprived communities being taught to pay tithing first.
Business Desk quoted a church youth manual telling people to pay tithing first, even when they think they don't have enough money to meet their other needs.
Yep, members are asked to trust God with their rent, groceries, power bill, and savings, and then the institution gets investment arms, property portfolios, legal structures, and very limited disclosures.
All tithing in New Zealand goes to the head office in Takapuna. After that, most members, including local leaders, are left in the dark about how their contributions are spent.
Which is a very different experience than what members get during their tithing declaration.
Mhm. In A Labor of Loyalty, a former bishop described calling families into his office each year to declare whether they were full tithe payers. He said that because the bishop is understood to be standing in for Jesus, the interview becomes highly pressured.
So members account for their money to local leaders. The institution doesn't account for its money gotten through the members to members in the same way.
No, and that is the asymmetry. And then the Florida purchase puts that asymmetry on display. The church can quietly buy a $240 million rental property. Members often find out because real estate reporters notice. Real Deal also connected the purchase to the church's broader financial opacity. It noted that religious institutions face limited public disclosure requirements compared with corporations and mentioned the 2023 SEC settlement involving the LDS Church and Ensign Peak Advisors. The SEC said the church and Ensign Peak used shell companies to obscure the size of the church's investment portfolio. The church and Ensign Peak paid a combined $5 million and did not admit or deny wrongdoing.
So when members hear about another major real estate purchase, the issue is not that churches own property. Churches own property. The issue is the whole arrangement around it.
Yeah. Tithing pressure, unpaid labor, limited transparency, massive property holdings.
And a moral language that makes members feel selfish if they question the cost.
The New Zealand reporting also describes high-end residential property connected to the church.
Yeah, it's not just in Florida, it's all over the world. The church owns at least 4 upmarket residential properties in Takapuna. 3 are beachside apartments at the Sands complex worth $4.2 million each, with amenities including a tennis court, gym, heated pool, spa, sauna, beach access, and resort-style grounds.
There's also a large modern house overlooking Lake Papuki worth $4.1 million. When Business Desk asked what it was used for, the church spokesperson said the church doesn't publish information about residential addresses.
Again, that answer may be legally careful, but for members who sit in tithing interviews and disclose whether they paid a full 10%, it surely lands differently.
It does. The church spokesperson told Business Desk that Latter day Saints follow the biblical practice of paying tithes and offerings, and that those funds are used to build and maintain houses of worship, alleviate poverty, support self reliance, fund missionary work, maintain schools in some Pacific countries, and support community and humanitarian efforts.
Some of that is true. The church does fund buildings and programs, missions, and welfare. The problem is that members are asked for personal sacrifice and personal transparency when the institution gives itself financial privacy.
And that privacy sits beside enormous wealth.
Right. That is why the Florida story is not just another real estate headline. It shows the church with the financial power to keep expanding its rental property portfolio. The New Zealand reporting shows how that kind of institutional power sits on top of tithing, unpaid labor, and member sacrifice.
So the two stories are separated by geography and time, but they point to the same structure. Members give money, labor, and loyalty. The institution turns that into capital, property, and authority.
That's the part to remember when the headline says the church bought another apartment complex. The question isn't only what the church bought, the question is what members were taught to give so the church could become the kind of institution that is buying up luxury real estate.
Thanks for spending your time with us today. If this episode resonated with you, or even if it didn't, tell us about it in the comments.
The easiest way to help other people find us is to leave a rating or review wherever you are listening. Even a quick 5-star rating, it takes like 3 seconds, helps us so much more than you would think. We're so grateful.
We are. And you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Postmormon Postmortem, online at postmormonpostmortem.com, and wherever you get your podcasts.
If you know someone who's navigating their own faith transition or who just loves a good deep dive into religious dysfunction, send them our way. Word of mouth is how we grow our eternal family.
We'll link the Florida real estate reporting and the Business Desk New Zealand articles in the show notes.
And we will be back next week with another episode of Mormon Mondays. Until then, Jess, I am sorry for what I said when I was Mormon.
I'm sorry for what I said when I was Mormon too.